Welcome to Rockin' Up Wrestling with your host, NWA Bobby Mack. Let's get to the show right now. Hey everybody, this is NWA Bobby Mack, and I'm just wanting to shoot the breeze with you here a little bit today. I just listened to Jim Ross's Ross Report, and I highly recommend anybody that's got the ability on iTunes or Podcast.1, a cheap plug here for Jim Ross and the Ross Report. Always a great time to listen to Jim Ross and his ideas. You know, he's a guy that's been in the business for a long time. He's got a lot of old school ideas, but you know, you got to remember too, with all these old school ideas, this is the guy that was in the middle of the Attitude Era. He was the one that was really bringing over the WCW unused talents to the WWE and making them superstars. You know, he'd recognize the talents, like Mick Foley was over in WCW not being used correctly, went to ECW, and then Jim Ross snagged him up against Vince McMahon's wishes, got him over to the WWE. You know, a guy you might have heard of, Stone Cold Steve Austin, same thing. Stone Cold coming over from the WCW over to the WWE. Triple H, another one of the guys that came over from the WCW. Edge was over there as a jobber in WCW too, and you know, that's another guy that Jim Ross was over will bring over. So anytime you get a chance to listen to Jim Ross and the Ross Report, I highly recommend it. It's only on one time a week right now, but it's definitely don't miss podcasting on Podcast.1. So make sure you check out Jim Ross. I was listening to Jim today, and I was kind of backtracking. I went to Jim Ross episode 5. Episode 5, if you want to look it up and listen to it. It had Mick Foley on it, the King of Hardcore, Mick Foley. And Jim was at the beginning of the show, was talking about some things that wrestling lacks nowadays. And I was listening to it, and I had some opinions on it as well, some of the things that wrestling lacks. You know, one thing he was talking about in WWE and I guess TNA as well, how people don't talk about the world champion. And I know, a lot of people are upset. Brock Lesnar is the world champion, but he's never there. He's missing pay-per-views. He's not on TV. And, to me, it really, I kind of think about Brock being in the same breath, not popular, not size of, but the way Hulk Hogan was actually back in the day. For those of you that are over, 35 maybe, we remember, and I'm 38, we remember Hulk Hogan, he never wrestled on television. He never was on Superstars unless it was a quick interview, putting over a pay-per-view that was, 3 or 4 months away. And if it wasn't time for a pay-per-view, you might not even see Hulk Hogan. Now, granted, you would have all Hulk Hogan's foes, and this is what Jim Ross was talking about. All the bad guys were talking about Hulk Hogan and talking about getting that World Heavyweight Championship. And now you don't see that. With Brock Lesnar, nobody mentions the world title except for the commentators when John Cena's in the ring, or Money in the Bank, Seth Rollins is in the ring. The other times, the World Championship isn't mentioned. You got Cesaro and The Miz talking about the Intercontinental Championships and the United States titles, and it's okay. That to me, why focus only on those secondary belts? I can understand if there's a personal feud or vendetta, then yeah, that's I'm going to get the United States champion, whoever Rusev. Going after him because there's a personal vendetta against him. But just to go after the U.S. belt when the world title is available doesn't make much sense. If you look back in programs with like Randy Savage, when Randy Savage became the Intercontinental Champion, the Intercontinental Championship wasn't his goal. He was always talking about Hulk Hogan on TV, that he was going to beat Hulk Hogan for the World Championship. And it just so happened he, got a match with Tito Santana. They had developed a little bit of a feud. It became personal with Santana. And at that point, he mentioned Tito and the Intercontinental title, but boom, as soon as he won the belt, he was right back yelling about Hulk Hogan and the World Heavyweight Championship, and that nobody was going to take the championship, the Intercontinental title, from him. Again with Savage, look at the feud that he had with Steamboat, one of the best feuds around. It was all personal. Ricky Steamboat never mentioned really the Intercontinental title during the interviews. He was always talking about Savage and making it personal, and then it got into, I can take that belt from you because I know how personal you're attached to that world title, or that Intercontinental title. So again, Jim Ross, really great feedback right there when he talked about that. guys, if you're not talking about the World Heavyweight Championship, then what's the point? What's the point of being in there? Yeah, I've heard guys on the indie scene, and there's a big fat joke that wrestles in Kingsport. Not going to mention his name, but he wears a crown and he doesn't have a castle. But that joke talks about that he never wanted to be in the WWE. He never wanted to make it to the WWF. He was just happy with being an indie promoter, an indie wrestler. That is complete BS. There is not one guy that ever jumped into professional wrestling just to go out there and do that. And if I'm wrong, then come back and give me some feedback and tell me I'm wrong. But in most cases, the guys that are a little bit older now that are promoting the indie scenes, they realize they're never going to make it to the WWF. And that's fine. They're never going to make it to TNA. That's fine. They realize that and now they're happy. But they will tell you, I would say 9.9 of them out of 10 will tell you, yes, when I started, I had dreams of making WCW. I had dreams of making WWF. I had dreams of making TNA Impact. Okay? The guys that say, oh, I never wanted to, no. Your dream has already been squashed and your ego's too big to ever admit that you wanted to get to that because you think for some reason your indie program is in direct competition with the WWE and TNA and the national programs. Wake up, fellas. It's not. There's no way in heck that you are even close to those numbers. There's a reason why you're selling gyms by, going out there and getting 25 people, maybe on your best day, 400 or 500 people coming in there, depending on how many guys you got booked and how many of their family members show up. That's the thing. You guys want to compare yourself to WWE when you had dreams of making it there, but then all you want to do is pretty much crap on the product now. But you all watch it because everybody backstage is talking about WWE. So that's pretty funny. Jim touched on UFC. They make their titles mean things. I agree with that to a certain extent. My only issue with comparing WWE and UFC or pro wrestling to UFC or sports entertainment to UFC is real. They're in the ring. They're really hitting each other. They're really hurting each other. So to compare the two, it's not a fair comparison, I think. It's like comparing boxing to pro wrestling. Back in the day, when Don King was around, he was a hype man. He knew, how to get that. And, he took some of his cues from Muhammad Ali. But then you look at Muhammad Ali, he openly admits he took his stuff from Gorgeous George. So, the two have always gone hand in hand. That's why there's there's pro wrestling and boxing commissions that are in states, New York, for example, where you got to have a license to wrestle or to box because they're considered the same thing. I heard a story. It was on Saturday Night Main Event, and apparently the Uncle Elmer wedding that happened on Saturday Night's Main Event. If you don't have it, definitely check out the WWE Network for only $9.99, and it's actually free this month in November. Check that out, and you'll see Uncle Elmer getting married. And the fact is, that's actually a real marriage because this was at a professional wrestling event, and because pro wrestling and boxing were on the same pedestal. There was no fake wrestling. It was all real. It was wrestling. And the commission saw it that way. So for them to do the angle with the wedding, Uncle Elmer actually had to really get married. So that was actually a real marriage that took place there with a real preacher and all that. So kind of off topic there. But one thing Jim has talked about a lot as well is time limit draws and how they've been eliminated. They don't announce time limits anymore. Me as a ring announcer, I always announce a time limit. I will find out how long the guys are going to go, and then I'll usually announce 5 or 10 minutes past that to make sure, there is a time limit aspect. And I was told when I went back to a promotion a few months ago, I was asking one of the announcers, commentators who had taken over my spot there, what kind of time limits I should give the matches. And he said, oh, no, we don't do that anymore. We don't do the time limits anymore. So I noticed that, even the art had been lost in the indie promotion. And when I went to the promoter, though, this promoter, one of the best promoters in the world, Tony Givens down with NWA Smoky Mountain, Tony right away, was like, hey, man, yeah, go ahead and add the time limits on there. I like the time limits. I like the way you do it like that. So, all props to Tony because Tony recognizes, hey, that's part of the finishes. That's a possible finish, and that's something that always gets Jim Ross really upset is, that possible finish has been eliminated. And, I think time limit draws would be awesome. If you look at Monday Night Raw. I don't need a main event every single week that ends either with guys running out and interfering or a clean finish. It doesn't make sense to me. When they had who was it? It was Seth Rollins and the guy oh god, what's Roman Reigns? When those two had that match and it was just a couple weeks before the pay-per-view and Rollins won clean and it made no sense. Like it was just there was no sense to have that match on free television. It was like a WCW main event. They put Hulk Hogan versus Ric Flair on TV every couple weeks. It lost its flair. No pun intended. I saw one time on WCW Nitro when I was watching on the WWE Network. It was the Steiner brothers versus the Road Warriors on free television. The Road Warriors had just come back in the WCW from WWE. This is one of those matches that were dream matches, and here it was on TV. But anyway, I digress. Getting back to the time limits, Monday Night Raw doesn't need a clean finish on their main events every week. If you had a time limit set and you have the ring announcer announce the time limit, and even if it's TV time remaining and it goes off the air, then that's good. That to me, that's drama. That brings me back the next week. Or even better, that brings me back to watch the WWE Network right after Monday Night Raw is over to see the bell ring, and then I get to see the run-ins or whatever else happens, or if the announcer, says, you know what, now we've extended the time limit now for an extra 5 minutes. That's drama. That the Iron Man match, that was drama. It had a time limit. You knew there had to be a winner. And I believe, time limits are something that's really important when it comes to TV matches. So, time limits, bring them back. Jim Ross touched on the second rope 10 punch. He was talking about when a wrestler throws the other one into the corner, the one wrestler will climb onto the second rope and then start delivering the closed fists punches to the other wrestler's face. And, usually the crowd will start chanting, as the punches are going 1, 2, 3, going all the way up to the 10 count. Jim's big complaint, and this one I really disagree with Jim Ross on. His big complaint was that it exposes the business because there's no marks left on the man's face or woman's face that's being punched in the corner. This is a technique I've been a wrestling fan since 83 or 84, and I've watched a lot of older matches as well. This is something I've always seen happen in professional wrestling. I think even, I want to say I've seen a match with Bruno Sammartino and Ivan Koloff, I believe it was, and they had this spot in their match. And this is, that's early 70s, late 60s. I think this is a classic wrestling move. I think it's a classic wrestling part of a match. Exposing the business, yeah, I guess if you're, with the smart fans that we have today, I guess, yes, it would expose the business. The guy doesn't have any marks on his face, and, nowadays with WWE, there's no bleeding in the ring, and if there is, God forbid, because referees come out with gloves and Ebola suits and all kinds of other stuff. But, I totally disagree with Jim Ross on this one. I think it's a nice spot. It gets the crowd into it a little bit more, maybe if they're not into it. So, I say keep this one. I really like this spot, and I don't see anything wrong with it. One spot, though, that we talked about, or Jim talks about next, is the DDT high spot. Now, this is funny because a couple weekends ago, I got into a argument on the internet, and you know how those arguments go, with a guy that claimed that he was a worker, and I think he's in Knoxville, and I don't remember his name, and I'm sure the fans that go to the event don't remember his name after they watch it either, but he was talking about on his Facebook or Twitter that, he uses a DDT, and it's just one of his setup moves. And then he was talking about how another guy uses a DDT, and another guy uses a DDT. So here you are with a move that in the 80s and 90s, actually, if would end a match. Jake the Snake Roberts, Raven, both use DDTs, different variations, into the matches. Now you're using it for a spot where you're hitting the DDT, and then the guy is getting right up or moving around. It's not devastating. And then you'll see, and I'll talk about the indie cards. You'll see that in match 1 or 2, where wrestler A hits the DDT. If he goes for a pin, the guy kicks out or whatever, or the guy gets up and they start schmozzing into some other things, and then 2 or 3 matches later, a guy uses the DDT and pins the man, and totally pins his opponent. Next thing you know, another match or two, the DDT is used again. It's not a finisher. It doesn't make sense, guys. It doesn't make sense. Look at it. If you're using the DDT and it's not your finisher, and you're just using it as a setup hold, the next guy comes out, he uses the DDT. It's his finisher. You know what that does to you? It makes you look weak. It makes it look like you have a weak DDT. Now, 2, 3 more matches later, after this other guy's won with this DDT and another person uses the DDT again, doesn't win, they look weak again. Okay? That's why you didn't have 15 guys doing the Superfly leap. That's why you didn't have every guy on the card doing the leg drop. That's why you didn't have every guy doing the figure 4 leg lock. There's a reason. Because it makes the other guys look weak if you use the holds. Now, again, promotion I've worked for many times, they will tell you in the back, no, you can't use that move. You can't use that move. This guy uses that move. And I think the only moves I really see that are used over and over are, your common arm drags, or, insiguris. You'll see those. But those aren't finishers, so that's okay. But, when you use a move, and I know a lot of people, the guy actually, this is one of his arguments on Facebook, well, Ric Flair used the figure 4 leg lock, and so did Greg the Hammer Valentine, so did Tito Santana, and so did Dusty Rhodes. Okay, so I'm going to take his argument right now and just kind of give him a little bit of glory if he knows who he is. Ric Flair and Dusty Rhodes were in the same company. Greg Valentine and Tito Santana were in a different company, but they were in the same company with each other. So right there's part of the argument split up in half. You got Flair and you got Rhodes with the figure 4 in the NWA. They both used it as finishers. They both made people submit with the move. They did not use the move to set up to hurt somebody's leg later on to do something else like a spinning toe hold or something like that. They used the move as their finisher. Now, Tito Santana, Greg Valentine, same thing. They used the move as their finisher. It wasn't a setup move. Do you guys understand the difference? If you had Jake the Snake Roberts and you had, let's say for example, Diamond Dallas Page. Let's say Diamond Dallas Page decides he's going to start using the DDT as one of his moves. Not his finisher, but one of his moves. So DDP takes, let's say, Randy Savage, DDT's Randy Savage, and then goes for another move to set up for his finishers. Randy Savage is groggy after the DDT from DDP. Try to say that fast. Next week, you see Jake Roberts versus Randy Savage. Jake hits the DDT, boom, rolls over, 1, 2, 3, the match is over. It makes Diamond Dallas Page's DDT, or whoever's DDT that was not the finisher, look weak. So you don't do it. Don't do it, guys. There's no reason to use a finisher in different matches over and over when it's not used as a finisher. Okay, so that's my rant about that. I guess that goes into, Jim was talking about how wrestlers kick out on the 2, and nobody kicks out on the 1 count anymore. I think that's a big thing too. It's something I don't even really recognize or pay attention to. But Jim Ross, when he pointed it out in that episode 5 of the Ross Report on podcast 1, yeah, it made me think about it. You kick out on 2, so it makes every single time look like you've been devastated, that you're barely going to be able to escape. There's not a lot of drama in that. There's not a lot of power in that. If you hit a guy with a move, and please don't hit him with your finisher and have him kick out. That makes me sick. But anyway, you're in the match, and the guy hits you with a devastating move. He knocks you down. Your referee comes over. You're being covered for the pin. You kick out on 1. That says something. That says something. That says that you are strong, that you are tough, that the move that guy just hit you with is not good enough to beat you. Now he hits you with that move and you stay down for a 2.5 count. All of a sudden, that move becomes something more and you become something less. So I think I think it's a good piece of business. I think it's a good piece of drama. Yeah, let's see some guys kick out at one. Let's see some guys kick out before the referee even hits the 1 count. Don't always wait for that 2.5 count. You don't need that drama of just laying there sucking wind, laying down on the mat for 2.5 seconds. He touched two, and I thought it was kind of funny. The 3.5 kick out. When a guy gets beat 1, 2, 3, and then all of a sudden he kicks out. Jim says he has no respect for people that do that. Says it's a selfish way of doing business. It's funny because when I think about that, the only guy that I really remember doing that multiple times is Hulk Hogan. Hulk Hogan, I think, did that with Sting. He did it with Warrior. He's done it a lot of times, and that's here or there. But I just thought it was kind of funny. And I'm sure Jim Ross wasn't pointing out Hulk Hogan, but to me, when he mentioned that comment and he said guys kicking out 3.5. Hulk Hogan's the only guy I thought of. So, next one and the last one on for today, we'll wrap it up. The lack of planning in programs. I totally agree with Jim on this one as well. It seems like since the Russo era, and I'll say error, everything was just kind of spur of the moment. This is what we're going to do this week, and we're going to do this next week, and that's it. There was no end game, and I think WWE does the end game with some programs. The rumor with WrestleMania is supposed to be Brock Lesnar and Roman Reigns is supposed to be the main event of that for the World Heavyweight Championship, which I really hope they don't do that because I'm not behind Roman 100% yet, and Brock's again part-time. So yeah, I don't want to get off on that rant. The lack of programming, though. So those two, for example, though, they are saying that that's going to be the WrestleMania match. So, okay, they've been saying that for a while now. Right away, you got to start building to that. And I know Roman's injury has caused a lot of friction and problems because of that injury. The program might not be going the way that they wanted it to. But then I question, where was it going to go anyway if Brock Lesnar's not on television and he's not at the pay-per-views? Like, if he's not around, and Paul Heyman's actually only been around very few times now, too. If he's not around, then how do you build this program? And I understand, WrestleMania is a long time away. You've got, basically Royal Rumbles when they start going in the full gear for WrestleMania. So maybe they've got the program planned for that. But I would think, some hints to, where it's going to go from here. I remember, in retrospect, looking at the Hogan and Andre matches. Andre wasn't always around, and then all of a sudden he came around, and him and Hogan were doing some tag matches on Saturday Night's Main Event. Then you'd see an Andre promo where just kind of a straight up pure babyface. Same thing with Hulk Hogan, and then you'd slowly start seeing Andre with a little bit of a glare at Hogan. And I'm not talking about just the Piper's Pit, but it really built. And if you really dig up some of the footage, it's all available on the WWE Network. For $9.99, you can see that slow build, and I think that's something that the writers now lack, and it's probably because they're not wrestling fans, they're TV fans, these are guys that are wrote for Friends, they had an end game that Ross and Rachel were going to get together. Is that right, Ross and Rachel? Yeah, that Ross and Rachel were going to get together at the end of the show, but they had plenty of time and plenty of efforts and energies that they could throw to get there. This is, you've got WrestleMania, you've got a set date on when it has to happen. Ross and Rachel didn't have to happen at the end of season 1, 2, 3, or 4. It could have kept going. WrestleMania's got a certain date, it's got a certain time. And yeah, the event's going to sell tickets just by its name. But again, as a pure wrestling fan, you want to know who's going to be there. And yeah, I think Ross touches, Jim Ross touches on it a lot with, WrestleMania sells itself. It's like the Super Bowl. It's like the World Series. You're going to buy tickets for those events even when you don't know who's going to be in it. But the world of professional wrestling is different because it's not professional wrestling. It's sports entertainment. And yeah, we're going to buy the tickets for WrestleMania to be there because it's going to be an event. But if you've got The Miz in the main event against John Cena, those last minute tickets for those high, the seats that are up high, that, the cheap seats, the Howard, what's that guy's name? I don't remember his name. But, those cheap seats out there, those seats aren't going to get filled by putting the Miz and John Cena in the main event. Now you add The Rock to it, yeah, the seats are going to get filled again because you're going to know, okay, what's going to happen with The Rock in the main event. But to me, again, I really think that they need to come up with better programs. I'd like to see them utilize the Big Four pay-per-views better. I don't even know if you can call them the Big Four anymore. I think WrestleMania and SummerSlam have kind of led the way on those. But if you build programs for those Big Four, boom, you can end the feud, and then the next feud starts right after that. And again, that might be an old school way of thinking, but if you set those Big Four as your end games every time, then now the writers have a certain date when they have to have their stories complete, and then they can build up their TV. And let's talk about TV for a second. Having the same match over and over and over again against the same two guys is boring. And I see people on the internet, and I see people online that are always, and I guess that's the same thing online and the internet, always complaining. Well, the fans are taking they're taking control of the event. They're not showing the wrestlers any respect. Yes, they are not showing the wrestlers respect, but at the same time, they're showing the writers no respect because the writing sucks. You can't have the Usos versus the Goldust and Stardust every single week on TV. It gets boring. You can't have Dean Ambrose versus Seth Rollins every single week. It gets boring. Or it's a vignette. It gets boring. Why don't we go back to the old way of doing things? I know I'm an old guy, but you do things the old way. Have a tag team match. Have a 6-man match. Have a singles match with them against somebody else, and the opponent is a special referee. Have them on commentary. And when I say have 6-man matches, don't have the same 6 guys in there. You have your 2 stars who your rivalry's against, and then you mix it up. Whether they team up with a different tag team, they team up with some NXT guys, they team up with some guys that have feuds of their own. Add that into the mix so it stays fresh. You don't want to see the Usos and John Cena versus the Rhodes brothers and Seth Rollins every single week. You don't want to see that because it's just like having the Usos versus Goldust every single week. You've got to be able to separate those things, and that's, I think, what the writers lack. And I think that's what Jim Ross was talking about. Yes, it's difficult to start at the end and work your way to the beginning. But if you have those set goals, and I think that's what the company needs right now, you set those goals, you have SummerSlam, Survivor Series, WrestleMania, and what am I missing? Royal Rumble. You have those 4 as your end games, and then you can move forward with what you want to do in between. And those are your end games. Those are where feuds ends. The next week, they start building on Raw for the next feud, and you have 2 or 3 weeks of a slow build, and then all of a sudden now you've got 2 months till the next big pay-per-view, till your next your end game happens. So you got 2 pay-per-views in between where you can have some decent schmoz matches, or you can have some good hardcore straightforward matches, and then on your end game, that's when you use either your gimmick or then you use your straightforward match. So I think again it's old school writing versus the new school of thought, and maybe I'm old school, but I think it'd be a better product. Anyway, everybody, thanks a lot for listening to Rocky Top Wrestling Drunken Wrestling Review. Sorry it wasn't much of a wrestling review, more of a podcast review. But again, check out Jim Ross's podcast, The Ross Report on Ep.1. I highly recommend if you've never listened to it, go ahead and start at the beginning and just go through it. The stuff I talked about today was on Jim Ross's Ross Report, episode number 5, with Mick Foley as a special guest. Another great episode. Other episodes I'd recommend, definitely the Jim Cornette episode, Magnum TA, and then this week he had James J. Dillon on. So check out the James J. Dillon episode as well, and I look forward to you, and we'll hear from you next time on Rocky Top Wrestling's Drunken Wrestling Review. Be sure to check us out again. It's very fun to tell your friends. We need more subscribers, so please join and tell us.